Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa, Parudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad, Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai, ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Parudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad, Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavanda ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. So, I will not be able to tell you the page number today because I have the one book that has a different pagination. But we're on text 36 of chapter 3. What's the page number? 174? 172? Okay. You're not together, are you? You are together? Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Let's see. Uh-oh. Okay.
36, Prabhu.
Yeah, text
Verse
36. Yeah, I know. Give me a second here. This thing is... Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this third day of May 2022 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in the third chapter entitled Karma Yoga, text number 36 on page 172. Okay, thank you. Arjuna Vacha Ata Kena Payuktoyam Papam Chadati Purushaha Anichan Abhivarshneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Chadati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Chadati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Varshneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. Want to try? Arjuna Vacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Baladi Viniyojitaha. Arjuna Uvacha Atakena Payuktoyam Papam Charati Purushaha Anichannapi Bhashneya Balad Iviniyojitaha. All right, I'll read the word by words. Arjuna Uvacha. I'll just read it myself.
There's one person from the Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry, Zoom. Anyone on Zoom?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Krishnangana.
Go ahead, chant. You're going to chant
Arjuna,
the verse? Go ahead.
Athakena prayuktoyam
Atakena Payuktoyam
papam charati purushaha
Papam Charati Purushaha
anichannapi vashneya
Anichannapi Bhashneya
baladiva niyojitaha.
Balad Iviniyojitaha.
Thank you.
Okay. Arjuna Uvacha, Arjun said, Ata then Kena, by what? Prayuktaha, impelled, ayam, one, papam, sins, charati, does, purushaha, a man, anichan, without desiring. Api, although, Varshneya, O descendant of Vrishni, Balat, by force, Eva, as if, Niyojitaha, engaged. Translation. Arjun said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Purport. A living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine, means pertinent, as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the Supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So this chapter, as is clear from the title, entitled Karma Yoga, is all about action. Action that helps us to connect with Krishna. That's the yoga part. But action in general is something we have to deal with one way or another, whether we're going to connect it to Krishna or not. And Karma Yoga generally emphasizes the idea of acting in such a way that you're not further entangled in the material world. Because karma has what has brought us to this state and of being embodied in a material body that's subject to all kinds of sufferings, birth, old age, disease, and death, etc. And being completely ignorant of our spiritual nature. What to speak of the Supreme Spirit, God. It's our activities from previous lives that we've done in ignorance or out of compulsion that have entangled us in a huge web of action and reaction. This is described very graphically at the beginning of the 15th chapter, where Krishna talks about the upside-down banyan tree, that this whole world is a reflection of the real world, the spiritual world. And why do we say this is less real or unreal? Because it's asat, means it's always changing. It's temporary. Just like a dream. In the middle of a dream, it can be very real. And your actual body can be sweating, or you even can wake up screaming, or maybe it's a very nice dream, and you don't want it to end. But one way or another, even though when you're in the dream, this is reality. But when you wake up, you realize, oh, it was just a dream. I really shouldn't give it so much importance, and let me get on with my real life. But Srila Prabhupada explained, but our so-called real life has the same quality of dreaming. Because it's temporary. It may last a longer time. It may seem more real. It's impactful. But as far as the soul goes, it's just as temporary as a dream is to our ordinary waking life. And we all have experience of that. I mean, I can recall back in the 60s, way before I learned anything about yoga or spiritual life or anything like that. I was completely absorbed in what we called anti-war movement. There was this war, you probably read about it. Most of you are too young to actually remember it directly. The Vietnam War. And, oh my God, we went to Washington, D.C., big demonstrations, 100,000 people demonstrating. We had a special demonstration at the Pentagon. And maybe it was Allen Ginsberg or somebody was saying, we're all going to levitate the Pentagon, and some of us believed it. And it was serious business, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, So this was what was important to me. I thought this was life and death. This was the most important thing to do. And there were the millions of others who thought so, because we were moved by the plight of the Vietnamese, and we thought it was a bad war. It wasn't necessary, and it wasn't. So time went on. Time passed. Our efforts were a failure. Nixon got elected and prolonged the war for another 5 years, and so many people died. And then we had the assassinations of that, John Kennedy at the beginning of the 60s, and his brother at 68, along with Martin Luther King. And the whole thing just seemed to be spinning out of control. And so it was a difficult decade. And then it ended. We went into the 70s. There was the whole hippie thing, and then the Summer of Love and all that, which I pretty much missed. But what I'm getting at is what was so important at that time was life and death issues, and what I dedicated so much mental energy, emotional energy, physical energy to and being involved with, and millions of others. Where did it all go? I mean, it was 50, 60 years ago. It's no more significant now for me than a dream that passes and you just knock it out. And when you think about it, that's true of everybody, everyone. The things that we put so much value on in terms of the material world are always changing. Material relationships, wealth we may have, our own conception of ourself. You look in the mirror, hey, not bad. I remember when I was 13, I was very vain. And I thought one hair came out. I'm brushing my hair. I had this big. Oh my God, am I getting bald? I thought, am I getting bald? I don't want to get bald. I was only 14 years old. So I, very involved. Adolescent. But it all passes by the force of time. Everything changes. What you think is important changes. Your sense of yourself changes. Completely on the material plane before we get into yoga. And that goes on throughout life. That goes on throughout life. Unless you happen to come in touch with this knowledge, which is teaching you about your eternal identity. This is really what we have to learn. What is there an eternal identity? Or is this all there is? This ever-changing phantasmagoria of the material world? That's an important question. And the resounding answer, as given in books like Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas and the Upanishads and Vedic literature, is yes, there is an unchanging reality within all of this changing world. And that's what you have to look for, the spirit, the consciousness, not the matter, ever-changing matter, but pure spirit or consciousness. And that's the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita, is that Arjuna's he represents us. His calculations were all on the basis of his bodily relationships. Because he was a warrior. He had killed many enemies in the past. He was very famous, very skilled. And he was righteous, too. He wasn't, on the side of the demons. But this particular battle had a special feature for him, and that was that the soldiers on the other side who he was going to have to fight with, he was related to them by blood relationships, marriage relationships, teacher and student relationships, with Dronacharya, with his mentor in military science, and his grandfather Bhishma, who had helped when his father died untimely. The 5 boys were helped to be raised by Bhishma Dev, and so he had a very strong relationship with him. He's on the other side. So he said, the usual calculation is, well, there's a bunch of strangers over there, and we're fighting for this, but these aren't strangers. So suddenly he doesn't want to fight. And he has all these arguments, and not just on his own personal thing, but on the basis of the Vedas. I'm going to help kill all these men on the other side, and their wives are going to be left without as widows, and they'll be unprotected, and it'll create havoc in society. It will all be because of me. I'll committed tremendous sin. I'll suffer, and everyone else will suffer. Where's the plus side on all this? But he knew, because that Krishna wanted him to fight. He's on the chariot, like 3 or 4 feet from him. And he knew that Krishna is God. And so he stopped his calculation, which was just leading him to really paralysis and depression. And he surrenders to Krishna as a disciple, not as a friend. There's no more friendly talk. I'm going to try to figure it out. Please instruct me for sure. You instruct me. Karpan nidosho pahata swabhava. First, he defines the problem. by this miserliness of me being on the bodily platform, I've lost my real nature. It's been taken away. I'm not feeling like a Kshatriya. I'm not inspired to fight because it seems like self-defeating proposition. So that's the first line. So now I'm asking you, Pritchami, I'm inquiring from you, Tvam Dharma Samuda Cheta, from this person who's bewildered about what's the right thing to do. Because it's very important in Vedic culture. What is dharmic? Not just what I want, but what is really the right thing to do. But he says, I'm bewildered about that. Dharma Samuda, completely bewildered. So, Yakshayaksyan, Nishchitam Bruhita. Please tell me how I can really attain my good fortune. Shreya. The word Shreya is very important in the Vedic culture. Shreya means for your immediate and also ultimate good. Not just, some superficial material thing, but for the ultimate good of the soul. So I don't know what that is. Please tell me for certain. I'm trusting your judgment, Krishna, as the Adi Guru, the original spiritual master. Shishyasteham. Now I am your shishya, your disciple. Now this word is very important. Sanskrit is such an incredible language. It's all built up from little root words, right? You know that. And the root word of the shishya is shash, which means to be controlled. So there's two other words we should know that has that root. Shastra, which is what we're studying here. We're meant to take, as it said at the end of the 16th chapter, that we should consult as evidence for what we should do in life and what we should refrain from doing, the Shastra. Not our own mind, not some friend or this or that, but the Shastra, which is coming ultimately from Krishna, from God. And that should be it. So that's Shastra. And there's another word, Shastra. These little marks on top of the letters are very important. The only difference between Shastra and Shastra is that little mark on top of the A, which makes it a long A instead of a short A. So Shastra is a weapon. That also you can be controlled by. So the idea is if you're not, and the word Shishya means someone who agrees to be controlled by the Guru, not by just anyone else, but by the Guru who you trust, who's a representative of Krishna. So ultimately you agree to be controlled by Krishna. So Arjuna has asked a question, and Krishna is speaking now. Now this is the third chapter, which is the second chapter of Krishna's instructions. So he's starting with the basics of karma yoga. How are you going to act for your own benefit? He even talked about, you want to eat? You want to eat? And we all want to eat. So he gives the two verses. Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyana sambhava. Yagya bhavati parjanya yagya karma samudbhava. That food grains, basically, even if you eat a meat eater, you have to feed the animals food grains, basically. So that's the source. The field depends on the rain. Who can deny it? It has to be enough and not too much, and it has to come at the right time. That's not in our control. Higher powers. Maybe the demigods, but they're under the control of Krishna. So it's Anad bhavanti parjanyana sambhava. So where does the parjanya come? That's the rain. It comes from sacrifice. That's the whole idea behind the Govardhan Lila, is that Krishna's father and friends, they were performing the sacrifice that they performed for many years before, so that Indra would be pleased and send the right amount of rain at the right time, and so that we can flourish. We've always done it. It's like paying taxes. Of course, Krishna interrupted that because he said you don't have to do that. And there was, the whole pastime. But here Krishna is speaking in general terms. So obviously, rain is essential for the production of grain. That's not rocket science. But where does the rain come from? That comes from sacrifice. And the sacrifice is born from your prescribed duties. In other words, everybody in the different stations of Varnashram system have their own sacrifices to perform. The duties that they perform in which they can be in tune with the universe and prosper. So then where does those duties come from? And that comes from the yagya karma samudbhava, karma brahmodbhavam vidhi. Your duties are defined in the Shastra. Another word for Shastra is Brahma. And the Shastra is being enunciated by the Supreme Lord. So ultimately, if you want to eat, you're going to have to connect with the Supreme Lord properly, perform the sacrifice. And indeed, there have been instances, these are documented. There was a drought in Hyderabad. Srila Prabhupada spent a lot of time in India in the 70s, and he was there with devotees and everything. And Prabhupada had spoken, and he was going to give various talks. And so they wondered he heard about the drought. So he said, go out and do Harinam. That's a jagya. That's the jagya for the age. Sankirtan jagya. The boys went out, and ladies were there also, and chanted from their heart, as they always do. It rained. It was new. It was in the newspaper. It's in the newspaper. Very, So the idea is that we need to perform sacrifice according to the instructions of Shastra in order to prosper in this world. And if we want to go back to Godhead to achieve the ultimate goal of life, we need to perform the sacrifice of the age, Sankirtan Jagya. The congregational chanting of the holy name is the central practice and principle of this Hare Krishna movement, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as given by Krishna himself in the form of Lord Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He not only gave it, but he practiced it himself. And far beyond just allowing you to live in this material world nicely, it bestows the highest treasure that there can be, which includes everything else, and that is pure love for Krishna. Prema. That's the real fruit of the congregational chanting. And before that happens, so many benefits are there. You can get free of anxieties and fears and doubts and so many things, and you can feel that you're actually progressing toward the goal of life. But it takes good association, and it takes discipline, and we're gonna read about that as Arjun's question is answered here, because if we have to act in a certain way, but we seem to be forced to act in a different way, how can we counteract that? How can we overcome our tendency to allow ourselves to be controlled by our lower self? That's going to come up here. So this is a wonderful question. In other words, I understand now that I should act properly, and I should refrain from acting improperly. But sometimes practically seems like I'm forced to do the wrong thing. I don't know if anyone here has been addicted to drugs or not, but we certainly know about that phenomenon. How alcohol, drugs, the opioid crisis, it just becomes impossible. That cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes for about 8 years, from age 15. Luckily, it wasn't too heavy, and I gave it up. But very difficult to get it. When I remember, I was working in a hospital in the early 70s. I was an inhalation therapist, means that I went up and I gave people, who were having trouble breathing, oxygen and so many things. And I remember, emphysema patients, lifelong smokers. And I remember this one guy, they have called a tracheotomy, where they put a hole here. You have to breathe through here because your system doesn't work. Had a tracheotomy. He was sitting up, and he's got a cigarette up there. Amazing, Because that's what addiction is. The body is demanding and overwhelming your intelligence and your will. So that's what Arjuna is answering. What is it as if by force overwhelms our good sense and we act in ways that we know are harmful to us? This is an important question. So let's see what Krishna's answer is. Shri Bhagavano Vacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidjainam Miyavaidinam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjun, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." I assume you know what wrath is? Intense anger. Purport: when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion. Illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity. And it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If, therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. One should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadyasya Yaton Bayaditadatascha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If, therefore, lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. So this is a very important verse, because here Krishna is saying that to Arjuna, here's your real enemy. It's not those soldiers on the other side. You know, they're other living entities, and they're temporarily maybe in the position of your enemies, but ultimately they're not your enemies. The real enemy is inside. Now we also will read in chapter 6 that the mind can also be said to be an enemy or a friend. What does it say? How does it go? That the mind can be the best friend or the worst enemy of the living entity. The mind that's attracted and attached to Krishna is your best friend. But that mind that is full of all kinds of material desires and anger is your worst enemy. We identify with it. This is me, this is who I am. But it's not you. It's not us. We are, who are we? Lord Chaitanya answered, of course we're pure spirit soul, but what does that mean? He says, Jiver, that's the Jiva soul. Jivera Swarupa Krishnera Nityadas. That every one of us here and every living entity who exists, hundreds of trillions of them, every blade of grass that's growing out there, of course these are fortunate blades of grass, these are on the Dham, in the Dham, so they get to hear the holy name. But even if they're not in the Dham, they could be out in the field somewhere. They're also eternal living entities, and they're eternal servants of Krishna. But they've forgotten that even more than we have. Buried, the consciousness is very, very, very rudimentary in lower animals, what to speak of the plants. But the consciousness is there. And eventually that blade of grass will die and move up into another plant, gradually up to the animals, all the way up to human beings. That's the understanding. So we are not only eternal servants of Krishna, but the next line is important. Krishnera tatasta shakti bheda bhed prakash. Tatasta shakti. What is the tata? The tata is the margin between spirit and matter. Prabhupada mentions in the previous verse that Krishna expanded himself into unlimited living entities for his eternal bliss. In other words, most of the living entities are still up there. They don't come down here. They're in Goloka Vrindavan or they're in Vaikuntha. and they're engaging in loving pastimes with Krishna. And they're enjoying and Krishna's enjoying it. Bas. Because they're not envious. They don't want to be Krishna, they want to serve Krishna. Take pleasure in serving Krishna. So that's the natural state. This is unnatural. It's not natural. It's not, it's certainly not something we want. That we go through life and we get committed to this, and this, and this who I am, and then it changes, and at a certain point in your life you realize, wow, there's something called death. I remember the first person I knew who died was my grandmother way back in the early 60s. I was a kid, maybe 7, 8 years old. But suddenly I was floored by that, I had no idea that no one had ever died in my life. But then you realize, oh yeah, people die over time. And one day, it's going to be my turn. I don't want it, but that's the part of the deal. You want to be separate from Krishna? You don't want to serve? Okay, serve the temporary body. But at a certain point, no matter how much you serve it, it's not going to survive. So what's that all about? In other words, just knowing that, one should ask the question: where did I come from? What's the meaning of all this? What's the source of everything? That's what Prabhupada talks about here. That's what's in the Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta means the end of knowledge. And Sutra means little aphorisms. So they need interpretation, so we have whole commentaries. The basic commentary, best commentary on Vedanta Sutra is Srimad Bhagavatam, right? By the same author. Begins with the same words. Almost begin. The beginning of the Vedanta Sutra probably is Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now, therefore, having come to the human form of life, you should inquire into the source of everything, known as Brahman. Where did everything come from? If you're not asking that question, you're asking some other question. Where's money? Where's sex? Where's this? Where's the job? Where's safety? Right? But not where did I come from? Where did everything come from? What's the meaning of it all? So the answer is in the next sutra. You don't have to wait very long. Janmad yasya yataha. This Brahman that you have to inquire into about the details is the source of everything and the adi. Every syllable counts. When you're talking about these sutras, everything counts, even more than with the regular verse. Janmad yasya. Janma adi. Adi is maintenance and destruction. So the source of everything and the entity who sustains everything and the entity who will ever destroy everything, that's what you have to inquire into. In other words, what we probably call the supreme absolute truth. Is there such a thing? Or is it just a chance meeting of molecules? Maybe that's the reality. But I have to inquire. But then the question arises, where to inquire? You're going to go to some college to inquire? You won't find that course in Janmad Yasya. Unless there happen to be a devotee, program there. Some universities have. So the answers are given in the books here, these essential literatures. Right at the beginning of Bhagavatam. What's the very first verse? Janmad Yasya Yaton Bayada Tatatashtartesha Bhigyasava. There's a whole huge verse describing, and even before the verse starts, we get the answer. The part of the Bhagavatam is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It begins with those words. So the answer is right there, Vasudev. And then he describes, how he's completely independent in knowledge. He inspired knowledge into the heart of Brahma. And, Brahma, and then, we'll learn in the Bhagavatam, then gave it to Narada. Narada gave it to Vyasa. Vyasadeva wrote it down, and his disciples and Vedas come down to us. So this is the knowledge that can finally end our imprisonment in this material world when we act on it. So this is how can we first of all, before we go on, you may recall in chapter 2 there was a couple of verses. 260 was it? Where Krishna is describing the same thing. Here it is. No, I've got this wrong. Here it is. Text 62 and 63. that he's describing how the living entity gets more and more entangled in the material world. So, while contemplating the object of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. From that attachment, lust develops. So here's how lust develops. There's a built-in attraction because we're part and parcel of Krishna. And so that love of God, which is a powerful force, has been perverted into attachment for material things. So that's what the senses are all about, is the things that attract the eyes, the ears, the touch, everything. And if we have no other engagement for the senses, they must be attracted. That's just the way it works. That's what this material world is all about. So here he describes the degradation of the soul in 2 verses. So you're contemplating the object of the senses and you become attracted, and then you become attached, and then that turns into kama, very strong desire to enjoy. But that must be frustrated ultimately. And so then you get krodha, anger. When anger can't express it, the psychologists know this, you turn it inward, it becomes depression. So now you're in this big funk. What you wanted, you couldn't get, or what you wanted and got, you lost. This is all part of kama, right? The material, everything's changing. So now from krodha, anger, comes bewilderment, sammoha. And from some bewilderment comes loss of memory, smriti bhranshad. And you'll even do things, from anger. Prabhupada tells a story on some tapes. There was a case he knew when he was in Calcutta where one brother had killed another brother. Who knows? Maybe the brother stole his girlfriend or something. That part we don't know. But he completely out of character. He did something that he regretted for the rest of his life. He was arrested, and he was tried, and he was sentenced to death. And the father pleaded, "Oh, I lost one son. He's my only son. Please spare him. Give him, life imprisonment, whatever, so I can visit." So he did that. So he had the one son. A tragedy, because of the uncontrolled senses and the loss of discrimination from anger. The world, do I need to tell you, is like on a knife edge right now, because you have a war going on that is just the most horrible thing. People can, what's going on with that? And they keep, saber rattling those nukes. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mention it practically every class these days. But that was like, I was 14 years old, and I was glued to the TV, black and white, watching Kennedy speak. You know how it happened. They had the boats coming toward Cuba, the Russian boats. They already had some installation of missiles on there, and we had blockaded the whole of Cuba. And so you have the Russian boats moving toward the American boats, and says, "Oh my God, they're going to sink one of those, and it's the end of the world." Bob Dylan wrote a song, "A Hard Rain is Going to Fall." It's maybe famous. I don't know if you know that. That was written for that. He was sitting in New York City. He wrote that. The hard rain. Yeah, really hard. So that, obviously, the world didn't end. Came this close. But I just read the defense secretary, the McNamara. He said, the only reason why we didn't have a war all these years was pure luck. It was just luck. There were more than that. There were other near misses, So now, here's another one. Everyone's praying that somehow we'll get through this without the whole world ending. But this is what happens. All out of anger. Anger, right here. I want that piece of land. You got it. I'll make up some philosophy where you're the evil one. You're attacking us, so I'll attack you. Madness. This is madness. And the whole world is in jeopardy. All because of what Krishna says here. And buddhi nashad, from losing memory, your intelligence is destroyed. When intelligence is destroyed, you're finished. So we don't want to start that. We don't want to contemplate the objects of the senses with the idea of enjoying them. That's the first step in degradation. So what should we do? So that Krishna will describe here. He'll give us the answer at the end of chapter 3 here. So any questions on this so far? This very important section. 2 verses. Krishna answers, it's lust only, Arjun, and which is your real enemy. And that lust, very importantly, we should remember, is love of God that's been perverted by contact with the material modes of nature.
Prabhuji, one question.
Something?
Yeah, so in the purport of text 37, it is said that the origin of lust is also supreme.
It begins, it's love of God, it's prema, that has been perverted due to contact with the material modes of nature. No. There's only this very strong desire to please Krishna, to serve Krishna. And there's no bad, result of that. It's all bliss. Okay, so now Krishna goes on, describing how the different degrees of lust. Dume navrete vanir, yata darsho malenacha, yatolbe navrato garbhas, tata tenedam avratam. Thank you. So you see, it's all avratam here. See, the three times that word appears in this verse. It means covering. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo or fetus is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Purport. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits its Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position, for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. Who are the 2 famous exhibitions of lust that became covered? Nalakuvra, Manigriva? Yeah, the sons of Kuvera. They were blessed though because they saw Krishna eventually. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. So, now one thing that we were reading about in chapter 2, that kama is the root of all of these other things that cover us. From kama comes krodha, and there's lobha, greed. And if you're always completely controlled by kama, then you become greedy to get more and more and more money to buy more and more things for you. So what did we learn in chapter 16? There are 3 gates leading to hell. Right? Trivadam nadakasedam, dwaram nasanatma, kama, krodha, tata lobas, tasmarita trayam tajet. So he's just describing the fate of those demons who are controlled wholly and solely by lust and anger. And so Krishna, they get covered, they lose their human form of life, they're thrown down and down into a hellish condition of life. So Krishna says there's three gates leading to this hell: lust, anger, and greed. The wise soul gives them up. Etava mukta konteya, tomo dwarai subiranaha. Those who have escaped these 3 gates. There's that word shreyas again. Such a person in Krishna consciousness acts only for his ultimate benefit, not for further entanglement and burying into this material world, which is the conditions, the soul controlled by lust. Tato yanti param gatim, and goes to the ultimate goal. So this is the fight. This is what sadhana bhakti is all about. And then he says, very soberly, he says, Yak Shastra Vidamutsuja, now to the Shastra. Yak Shastra Vidamutsuja Vartate Kama Karataha, here's the word kama again. Nasa Siddhim Abapnoti, Nasukam Naparam Gatim. Now he's giving the essential verse. But one who discards the injunctions of the Shastra and simply continue to act on the basis of kama, whims, my own desire, then such a person does not get happiness or perfection or go to the ultimate goal. Therefore, last verse of the 16th chapter, essential verse, tasmat, begins with therefore, tasmat shastra pramanam te karyakari vavastito. Therefore, we should accept the Shastra, the revealed Shastra, which Prabhupada gave us with so much work, as evidence or as authority of what we should do and what we should not do. And knowing what the Shastra says, we should actually do and not do on that basis as a matter of duty, because our conditioning is going to push us against that. But our higher intelligence, purified by the Shastra and by chanting Hare Krishna, can give us the spiritual strength to act according to the Shastra, and at a certain point, it becomes easier, spontaneous. Those other things that were controlling us, no longer. The things that, I gotta have this. I mean, a lot of it is just food. You walk down the aisle, I go to Ralph's sometimes, and the whole aisles of snacks and, the whole thing, engineered food to addict you. I can't, but I mean, they even had part of the advertising. I remember many, many years ago. Bet you can't eat just one, potato chips, Doritos, whatever, But a devotee, walks down the aisle, it's not offered. I'm not going to eat that. There's no desire, I go there for one reason, to buy the kale, the organic kale. Nobody likes to eat that spontaneously. It's very cheap, It's very good for you. I put it in the smoothie, Anyway, so we're running out of time, but I'll end with this one verse because it's always pertinent to come back to it. And it starts out with the word we're studying, kama. Kama ninang katina katita palita durni deshas. Tesham jata mayana karuna nattapano prashantihi. Utsvijayata nadiyotapate sampatam labdhabuddhis tvamayata akshadadamabayam mam niyung swatma dasye. In how many ways have I sought to obey the seductive demands of my wicked desires? They've shown me no mercy. Yet on I've gone shamelessly trying to quench lust's unquenchable fires. But now I'm rejecting these hellish desires, for my higher intelligence now has awoken. O Krishna, O shelter of fearlessness, please let me serve you with faith that will never be broken. You notice that he doesn't stop serving. Either we're going to serve our lower selves and the demands of the lust and the anger and the deeds and the Doritos, or we're going to serve Krishna. If we serve Krishna, we'll lose the desire for serving that, and we'll be free. He accurately describes them like taskmasters. I remember many, many years ago, I saw a movie. Maybe you know what the movie is. There was a slave ship. It was like on the Roman days or something. And the guys were chained. They were in the boat, and they had to pull. And they had other guys with the whips, pull on the slave. That's what when I chant this verse, I think of that. Is that we're the soul, but we've become so entangled in the material world that we're controlled by, lust, anger, and greed as taskmasters, taking us to hell. So we want to give up that service, but we can't give up service because that's our nature. And go to Krishna, please let me serve you with faith, because that service is wholesome. That produces bliss and freedom. Whereas serving our lower self, lust, anger, and greed, produces bondage and suffering. So that's what's happening in this section of the book, and we'll complete this chapter tomorrow. Very instructive section. Okay, we kind of run out of time. I'm sorry, I haven't left time for questions. But you have a question, you just walked in. Don't forget. Go ahead.
So I know you have an answer for this. But my question is, why can some of these lower pleasures, why did Krishna make it so, or is it our free will that makes them so enjoyable that it's hard to free from that bondage? Why are they that enjoyable? Why aren't they just, we can take them or leave them? Why do we become so attached, and why are some of them so, you know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. And the answer is
it a test?
Because Krishna Bhakti is so really enjoyable. It's a perversion. In other words, it's a reflection. And why does he let us get entangled that way? Because we want it. We need to get kicked in order to understand reality. This is the way it's set up, you know. In other words, we want the most valuable thing, but this is how we have to pay for it. We have to pay for it by weaning ourselves away from these lower things and throwing ourselves into bhakti and chanting from the bottom of our heart to be saved. You know, to Krishna, please give me attachment for your holy name. There's so many slokas I could quote about that. You know, we need that Krishna is waiting for us to turn like that. That's the price. You have to work for it. If it's something is so valuable and invaluable, it's going to take every ounce of our desire and determination. It's the way it's set up. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Okay, now we need to move with alacrity.